Good evening. I'm going to call this meeting of the Carson City School Board to order on February 23rd, 2021. I want to apologize for our late start. We were having some computer issues. For the record, we have two trustees that are unable to make the meeting, but they were planning on being involved remotely, only we're having some issues remotely. So what we've done is we have them on our telephones up here so that they can participate through text in the event that they have any comments or whatnot. So I apologize for the delay, and I apologize for any other inconveniences this causes for anybody, but we're doing the best we can. So item 1 of the agenda is adoption of the agenda. We have a motion by Trustee Crossman, second by Trustee Walker. Do we have any comments about the agenda by the board? Any from the public in attendance? Or how about, well, we don't have remote or telephone.
No public comment, Mr. Cassioppo.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Aye. All right, any opposed? Motion carries. Item 2, please join us for the flag salute, and Trustee Varner, if you'll lead us. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. Item 3 is the superintendent's report. This is for information only. Superintendent Stokes.
Thank you, President Cassioppo, members of the board, staff. Good to be with you this evening. I have a number of things to bring to your attention. First off, this weekend, starting Friday, February 26th and February 27th, we will be, as a school board, engaged in the Silver State Governance Training. The training will take place at the Carson High School Library, and we are to begin at 9 a.m. and will go through 5 p.m. And then the next day on Saturday, we'll start at 9 and end at 3. Lunch will be provided both days, so plan to come. We're expecting to have several trainers along with some other trustees who may be joining in a makeup session for them. I'd also like to make mention that Trustee Ramirez was recognized by Seroptimist International. Recently, they were recognizing an activity that they called Women Helping Women, and Trustee Ramirez was celebrated for this honor. And the celebration was to recognize women in our community who are improving the lives of women and girls. So, Trustee Ramirez, congratulations. Very nice. I also wanted to report to the board that on February the 16th, President Cassioppo and I met with a group of citizens who responded to an invitation to come and have a conversation about equity in education. We had about 11 individuals who came. Some were members of our staff, some were parents, and we had a nice hour-long visit. And all of the individuals who were in attendance had indicated that they planned to take part in tomorrow night's Community PLC, where we will be doing an additional level of work as it applies to equity in education. At this point, we've had 72 individuals show interest in this meeting, which will be held in Zoom format. So we're looking forward to that conversation, and the goal for that meeting will be to take the concepts and the ideas associated with equity in education and begin placing those into the strategic plan. As you know, our strategic plan actually sunsets at the end of next school year, and it's my goal to make sure that the school district is well positioned to continue using the strategic plan. And of course, the strategic plan will be or at least the goal is to have the strategic plan improved by including statements regarding equity. I wanted to make sure that trustees and also our community knows that the NIAA has approved the fall sports season. So I recognize that this is late winter, but nevertheless, full contact football has been approved, as has been volleyball, soccer, and cross country. Did I miss any? I think possibly even girls golf, but we're excited for that. There's a great opportunity here for our students to finally get back in the playing field and to enjoy the teamwork and the excitement that comes from participating in extracurricular activities. We're also expecting to see and hear the band, and so this is an exciting time, and we're looking forward to all those things that will happen. And finally, as most of you have heard, the governor has lifted some restrictions as it applies to schools. The challenge here with the governor's newest recommendation is that our buildings be allowed to be occupied to 75% occupancy. That's a little difficult when it comes to trying to take secondary schools that have very specific schedules and trying to make that operate, trying to make that work. So we're in the process of trying to come up with a plan. We hope to be able to have a conversation with the trustees at the March 9th meeting. And we hope too that our community members might come in and provide some feedback. So unless you have questions, Mr. President, that's my report for this evening.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stokes. I'm going to move on to board reports, and we'll start out with Carson High School, and we have Sarah Wiggins with us. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi there. So at Carson High, as Mr. Stokes said, we just finished out winter sports and we're moving into spring sports. Today, the juniors also had the ACT, so seniors, sophomores, and freshmen didn't have to go in today. And then moving out from winter, student council is also going into our spring committees. So for this, we are planning a few different events, some being teacher appreciation, school beautification, senior sunset, and then coming up soon is academic letter for the seniors. And that is going to be March 8th from 6:30 to 8:30. We are also going to have the letters coming out hopefully later this week. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We're going to move on to NASB updates. Laurel, do you have anything for us?
There we go. I don't think there's an update that I have. I missed the Pacific Region call, so if Stacy wants to update on what happened on that call, and Mr. Stokes filled us in on our Silver State governance. So that's all I have at this time.
Okay. Yeah, Stacy, have any comments on it? And again, folks, I apologize. Two of our trustees, due to no fault of their own, are trying to participate remotely, so things might be a little slow.
Stacy, if you have any comments on your board report, I got you by the speaker here.
I'll just save it for next meeting. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Stacy. So now we'll move on to announcements from the board. Why don't we start off with Mike, Trustee Walker?
Good evening. So I had a great conversation with Mrs. Clario from Mark Twain today, and they are very close to meeting their $1,500 goal for their Helping Hands fundraiser. They need $300 more, and so if the school could raise $300 between the end of the fundraiser, she and her assistant principal are going to be taking a pie to the face, and she promised me I could attend remotely and view the celebration, so I look forward to that. And she also is happy to report that they have successfully completed their access testing, and that completes my comments.
Thank you. Trustee Ramirez.
Well, first of all, I appreciate Mr. Stokes' kind announcement. I want to just say that I really appreciate the opportunity of serving in my community, so thank you. All right, so my announcements. I had the opportunity to meet with Mrs. Zona from Siliger Elementary School. Had a really nice visit with her, and she informed me that they also have completed the access testing for the English language learners. Their focus this month is to increase the dialogue and discourse between students. They give them little reminders and recognitions whenever they hear it on the announcements or whenever they do a walkthrough on campus. From Empire Elementary School, congratulations to them. They were awarded $20,000 from the Governor's Office of Science and Technology, Innovation and Technology. And this will be to continue training their STEM staff. And then 4 of their members received a $200 grant from the Carson City School District Foundation. And unfortunately, they had a vandalism on their Reach for the Stars mural on their playground. They were able to find an artist to repair it, so that's the good thing, but it's unfortunate that those things are happening. And they also just completed the access testing, and they feel good about the results they're waiting to see. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you very much. Trustee Crossman.
Got it. For Fritsch Elementary School, Mr. Brown would like the parents to look forward to information coming in Parent Square regarding the Harry Potter themed Reading Week, which will be March 2nd through 5th. And for Fremont Elementary School, Dr. Wardja Joseph wanted to congratulate their music teacher, Mr. Chang, because he received a mini grant from the Carson City Schools Foundation, and he also received a significant amount from an anonymous donor, and so he's going to be able to add a large number of ukuleles to his classroom curriculum. So she's grateful for both of those donations that made that possible. And also Fremont has started an after-school club, and they have over 120 students participating 3 days a week. And their staff and administration would like to thank the Carson City Sheriff's SRO and the office for, as well as all of the families who are keeping safety in mind, because they're working to make drop-off and pick-up safer for everyone. And that concludes my report.
Great, thank you very much. My son missed it by about 8 years. He was a ukulele enthusiast
You can,
with the skills of his dad, so sorry you missed it. All right, Trustee Varner.
yes, this week at Carson Middle School, they're celebrating 587 of their students who met or either exceeded their winter map goals, so that was really great. And during the Valentine's season, they also enjoyed what they called a blind date, a book blind date. And what they did was able to get a book that was wrapped in a paper bag, and they didn't know what the book was, and they had 110 kids who read those books. So that was a pretty good turnout. And their 7th grade social studies just completed the Declaration of Independence unit, and they're working with their librarian to have a writing contest where they're going to be working on claim, evidence, and reasoning to answer, and they'll get some kind of prize for answering the question, what does freedom mean to you? And then at Boardwalk Bray, they're having their reading week, which begins March 1st. The theme this year is Change Your World, Read. And to celebrate, they're having a dress-up week for the week. And on Monday, it's going to be pajamas and green eggs and ham. Tuesday, it's hats off to Dr. Seuss, where the students are supposed to wear a hat for Dr. Seuss's birthday. And staff is also going to be dressing up. Wednesday, it's going to be Dress for Success. And the students are supposed to dress for what they want to do in their future career. Then Thursday, it's Explore the World of Reading. And the students are supposed to dress as an explorer or / camper. Then Friday, it's Figurative Friday. Dress as or aware an idiom or other creative vocabulary word. So that should be a fun week for them coming up. And they've also completed their access testing, and they're going to be beginning their gate testing March 2nd for grades 2nd through 5th. And before I end, what I'd like to do is also give some recognition to Elisa Jensen, who's a third grade teacher at Mark Twain. I was able to view the video today, the latest video on why I teach. And hers was kind of on the pandemic, why she's teaching through the pandemic and what made her become a teacher. And I got to say, I think she did an excellent job. I really enjoyed it. And I think it's going to help whoever views that has maybe an inkling to become a teacher, maybe they would go ahead and explore that option. So I just want to give her a shout out. I think she did a great job. And that's my report.
Great, thank you, Richard. As for my report, just two quick things. Pioneer High School, just wanted to congratulate one of their students, Connor Treese. He's had a goal for a long time of graduating from high school. Rocky start, but he's on a good path apparently. So we're very proud of him. And most recently, after becoming a Pioneer student earlier on, he wound up joining the Western Nevada College, the Jumpstart program through Western Nevada College, and he's taking automotive. He's in the automotive program through WNC, and he's enjoying that, and he sees that as a career path for himself. So he's looking forward to pursuing that career in the automotive industry. So we just wanted to congratulate Connor and let him know we're proud of him, as we are with all the students. They're doing great things, and we look forward to hearing from all of them. And then just to reiterate, the reading week, I know a couple of teachers kind of got an early start on it in terms of prepping the kids for next week. And there's a couple of them doing a book in a bag where they introduce various books to the students, and the teachers dress up as the main character in that book. And they started doing that today just to, again, introduce the week to the students, and it was well received. And so just another creative way our teachers are reaching out to these kids. And the students, I should say, are very receptive. So I think it'll be a good start. Okay, that concludes board reports. Moving on to item 5, association reports. Do we have any association reports? Nothing in person. How about telephonically or?
No association reports, Mr. Cassiopo.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to public comments. And the rules, if you will, for public comment are in the agenda, so I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but we do ask on issues that folks limit their comments to 3 minutes per person and try not to repeat the previous comments. Let's see, this is also not for action. While we can discuss items, we can't take action on it. So at this point, do we have any public comments, either in person, telephonically, or otherwise? Message or pigeon?
No public comment, Mr. Cassiopo.
All right, thank you. Oh,
Mr. Cassiopo, I apologize. Yes, I do.
came in at the wire.
Ooh, my apologies.
No, that's great.
This public comment is from Regan Foster with regards to Mr. Wallace. In light of the recent allegations against him, I would like to express my support for Brian Wallace. As a student at Eagle Valley Middle School years ago, I acted as a student aide for Mr. Wallace. I can say without hesitation that mean-spirited man depicted in these claims is not the man that I knew during my time as a student. During my 8th grade year, my father passed away in a tragic accident, and upon my return to school, Mr. Wallace was one of the teachers who made it a priority to help me get through such a difficult time in my life. Mr. Wallace is a committed educator who has been working for Carson City School District for years and who I believe cares deeply about all students that enter his classroom, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or country of origin. There is no room for racism in education, and I believe that Mr. Wallace harbored such prejudices, they would have been exposed long ago. While I was not in his classroom the day of the alleged incident and thus am not in a position to comment on the veracity of the accusations against him, I would simply like to point out the lack of context provided for these claims. In the current cultural climate, no reasonable person would make such inflammatory comments without expecting retribution. I believe that Mr. Wallace is, in fact, a reasonable person and that these alleged comments have, at the very least, been taken out of context. I applaud the school district and Mr. Cassioppo's attempts to respond to these accusations in an objective and rational manner, and I only ask the members of our community to look at the situation rationally before passing judgment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renee. Any additional public comment?
No, Mr. Cassioppo.
Okay, we're going to move on then to item 7. Item 7 is the 2021 Nevada Legislative Update, Report on Items of Interest Relating to Education. This is a for discussion only topic, and we have Mr. Superintendent, Richard Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, members of the board. As you know, our legislative year is currently in the works. Things are moving along, but it looks different like most of this year. As you know, due to the COVID pandemic, the legislative building is closed to everyone except legislators, key staff, and accepted reporters. We do, however, stay up to date of what's going on based on the work of our lobbyists, and Dr. Przynski, as you know, works for the Nevada Association of School Superintendents, and so we have a nice pipeline, as it were. So in the first several weeks, I have a few things to report. You had in your packet a list of the bills that had been reported up to date, and I'd like to go through just a few of those. It seems that as I've had a chance to listen to some of the bills and to read through the work that is being done at the legislature, there's some work that's being done to try and accommodate the conditions around education. And so obviously there are two houses in the legislative body that hear these different bills. And so I'll try not to duplicate some of these. SB 36 is a bill that is quite interesting. It creates a plan for responding to a crisis, emergency, or suicide, and requires the Department of Education to include information regarding an epidemic. So in essence, whereas we really haven't dealt with epidemics from a statewide perspective in the past, this bill, if passed, would provide for each school district in the state to have guidance from the State Department to help roll out changes or modifications that might come about because of an epidemic. In SB 83, the Department of Education, I think, was anxious to try and address some of the concerns and considerations that are going on within the state as well, especially as it applies to this time. As you know, when school was closed in the spring of 2020, a number of things were impacted, not only on the state level and the local level, but on the federal level. Each state is required to submit to certain types of assessments and measures of accountability. This particular bill, if passed, would allow the state to take some action within any changes like this pandemic that has occurred, and have the ability to waive certain exams and attendance rules and regulations and conditions surrounding accountability. And so this is something that is from the Department of Education that they believe is important to consider, not only as this pandemic winds up, but also as any future ones might occur. Also, one of the things that has been accomplished is the Nevada Association of School Superintendents had an opportunity to present their invest document to both houses, and that's always an important aspect for each legislative session. And there again, they emphasized the need to fully fund the base and to try and restore, especially from a financial situation, those items that have been lost. As you're all well aware, last spring, there were a number of state-funded grants that were reverted, as it were, back to the state government. And there was also a loss of significant dollars just because of COVID and the closure of businesses. And so as these things have occurred, those changes represent losses of revenue to the school districts. And so the superintendents believe that not only this, but the losses that occurred during the Great Recession and other times, and also those that may occur now as we're looking at potential changes in educational funding, that we have an opportunity really to be made whole, as it were. And so that's one of the tenets of the invest document. Also coming out of the legislature so far was SB 27. And this bill also allows for the Department of Education to make a variety of changes that would streamline some of the commissions and some of the committees that are identified in statute. And part of this represents, I think, work that maybe you've heard about in specific committees and commissions. And again, there's an attempt here to try and to reduce some of those items and put it more in the hands of the Department of Education. A similar bill is SB 76, and this particular document could actually change the regional trading programs that we've been using in the state for a number of years. And I know there's still some debate about that one. And again, there's a possibility that the State Department of Education could be involved in that particular modification. In AB 57, which is also a bill that has been sponsored by Washoe County School District, but it would have the effect on all school districts, is to make a temporary change to the teacher evaluation process. Right now, because of the strange year that we're having, where the majority of the state's students have not been in in-person instruction, AB 57 would actually change the teacher evaluation system for the current school year to have 0% of the teacher and administrator evaluations utilized in such a way that they're not held accountable for these conditions in those teacher evaluations. And then in the following year, it would be 15% of the teacher and the administrator's evaluations that would be used in making that teacher and administrator evaluation. So we're watching some of these things with great interest and hope that these conditions are in the best interests of the school districts. And I'll continue to review these documents as they come through and as we learn more about the legislative session and bring those to the school district. I know that Trustee Crossman is involved in representing the school board from her position. And certainly we have occasion to work together and to review some of these things for the betterment of our operations. I don't know if you have any questions regarding any of these bills.
Yeah, question. We'll start off with Trustee Walker.
So more of a comment, and I would just hope that just as the state's looking at waivers for these assessments that are mandated, I think that we also need to really advocate for that AB, is it 57, that takes that SLG down to 0. Our teachers and administrators are working really hard in these schools in very changing conditions. You know, most teachers have 2 or 3 groups of students that they're responsible for planning and instructing. And then we've seen a number of times this year that those conditions have changed. And probably they're going to change again with the newest directive from the governor. And so right now, we just need to focus on filling in the gaps that some of these kids have gotten in this time and getting them up to speed. And I think that that's one less thing that our educators should have to worry about right now.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Any other comments from the board or questions? Seeing none. Richard, thank you very much. We do appreciate the updates. And it's early in the session, but we'll see how we progress. Item 8 is a presentation by the superintendent on the state of the district, informational overview for the Carson City School District for the 2020-2021 school year and beyond. This is also an item for discussion only, and Superintendent Stokes will lead it off.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Each year we try to give a little presentation that talks about our current status within the district. Dr. Delphin always teases me about my vanilla presentation. He likes it when I have more color, but I find I'm challenged by the formatting of the colored background. So thank you for hanging in there with me. This information is, at least on this particular screen, is not new, mostly for those who might be new to our area or listening in tonight thinking that they might come to Carson City. We feel fortunate as staff members, and I feel fortunate as a community member that we have a school system that is of just the right size. We're able to do a lot of good because of our size. We're not too large that people get lost in the mix. And we're able to know individually our staff members. And in a lot of cases, we get to know our students quite well as district leaders in addition. So I'm grateful to live in our school district where we're able to do a lot for our staff and also for our students. A little retrospect here. The pandemic, of course, began in March of 2020. And when this happened, I believe that most people felt that this school closure was going to be a short-lived event. I know I did. I thought a couple of weeks and people will get over it and this thing will go away. Unfortunately, that closure took us all the way to the end of the school year. And during those 2 months, the schools really had to modify how we operated. As you know, there was only made available to us the possibility of remote learning. And at that time, we used paper packets to accomplish that goal. Again, the process was new for all of us. And as the work went forward, we had a lot of our staff members that ended up working from home. We modified a lot of what some of our staff members did every day so that they could support this work of helping out. In some cases, we had staff members who were working in the classrooms as paraprofessionals who helped put lunches together. We had bus drivers who, instead of hauling students, hauled those meals and dropped them off to students that weren't able to have transportation to pick them up. So a lot of our operations were impacted, as were just the traditional end-of-year activities. As you know, there's a lot of movement to try and accomplish things like graduation that we had taken for granted over time. And kudos to staff members and to families and to students for helping us work together to figure out ways to do this. And of course, probably one of the biggest things that happened was just the difference in how we did things. Everything from how we cleaned our buildings to how our staff members interacted with each other. We came to live with face masks and social distancing in a way that we didn't expect, I think, when the school closure first occurred. With the school closures, we also learned from the federal government and from the state that our accountability indicators were going to be carried over from the year 2018, 2019. So if you were to go on the state's webpage and look for the Nevada report card, if you're just curious or if you're considering coming to our district to live or moving to our area, those numbers are a little outdated. And that's because of this change that occurred so drastically last spring that a lot of those numbers, those assessments, chronic absenteeism rates were waived. We also knew that the paper packets were not going to be the best solution, and there was still 2 months' worth of curriculum to go through. However, trying to figure out how to do that from a remote location was pretty difficult. And then, of course, to try and do paper packets without your teacher being right in front of you, we found it necessary to move to a pass-fail grade situation, which also had an impact on students and teachers alike. Of course, we talked a little bit about the lack of spring student activities and some of the responses that we ended up going to. I think it's important to talk about kind of where we've been, because just today I received a letter from State Department of Education for the U.S., and they are putting out information to school districts across the country that if states are willing to request a waiver, which we'll be meeting with the superintendent of public instruction tomorrow via Zoom, that there's a possibility that this year's accountability and assessment requirements would also be waived. So in a way, that's good because there's nothing normal about this school year, but at the same time, we're still going to be pushing down these numbers that were accomplished in 2018, 2019. So having the best data at our hands is going to take a little while for things to get back to normal before that can occur. So some of the information that we do have that is updated for the class of 2020 are the items that you see on the screen. There were not appreciable changes to these numbers from past years. A slight decrease in our Hispanic population, slight increase in our white population in terms of just ethnicity. Our IEP numbers are very similar to what we've seen in the past. Our LEP numbers are slightly reduced, but our free and reduced lunch numbers are actually up a little bit. And that's really something that we've seen across the state. And one number that I didn't get added on to this is the McKinney-Vento number. So as you know, those are our students that are in transition. And in 2020, the high number that we actually had for the district was 411 students that found themselves in that state of transition. Whereas this year, that number dropped to 280. So that's our high number. So whether or not people are able to be more stable right now, or if just conditions are unknown to a greater extent, I thought that you'd find that data point interesting as well. This is a comparison of Carson City School District against the state. Again, these numbers are indicative of the class of 2020. And you'll see across the board there that we've got IEP stands for Individualized Education Plans, ELR, Second Language Learners or our English learners, and FRL is Free and Reduced Lunch students. And then the graduation rate is about 2 percentage points down from what they have been in the past. And again, as we're talking about this year, which has been unique to say the least, and last year not having the ability to go to school for the month of the last part of March, April, and May did have an impact, at least on our graduation rates. So this shows you some comparisons over time, and you'll see there again the rate change between our class of 2019 and 2020. So I wanted to show this slide because, again, this is a slide that has been in these presentations for the last several years. And these numbers are a carryover from the 2018-2019 year. And it may be yet another year before we actually have accountability numbers, or that the state's accountability process is mobilized again. And so the numbers that we see are the numbers that we have, at least for the time being. Any questions about any of these slides or data points? So during the pandemic, here are some things that we dealt with as an organization. If you think back, we still have maybe some decision-making around 1600 Snyder Avenue. And the consideration as to whether or not to purchase that property right now is on hold. I believe the property is still available. I drive by there pretty regularly. And I think that's an important concept because, as we've all seen, the construction activity in town, it seems to be moving quite quickly. If you've not driven by the old Lampa Ranch, I encourage you to do that, just to take into account how some of the residential properties are being developed in our area. So being able to plan for future growth in the school district, I believe, is an important aspect of our responsibilities. Of course, we know that we lost state revenues due to restrictions placed on businesses. And we have learned how to take into account students and staff members who may have been exposed to individuals who were testing positive for COVID-19. In some cases, we had to close schools. In some cases, we had to close classrooms and quarantine students. And of course, we all learned some new vocabulary: contact tracing, quarantine, ties, asymptomatic, second dose. All of these things really represented a lot of information that we had learned since the start of the school year. I mean, we were very fearful when the school year started, as were many of our families, as were many of our staff members. And pushing forward to now, we feel like we've learned a tremendous amount and able to move forward and really make good decisions in light of the pandemic. We feel fortunate that there's federal stimulus money that's coming our way and has come our way. We were beneficiaries of about $3.6 million in federal funds that not only came to us directly, but were also provided to us by the city of Carson. And we're grateful for them thinking of us as we had to make transitions and buy materials and learn how to deal with building operations during a time that is so unique. We also have, as part of this legislative session, a need to understand what the new educational funding mechanism is going to do for us. And Mr. Fueling will be talking a little bit about that in the next presentation. Of course, not only have we had to deal with academic changes, if you think about our current schedule of a hybrid model, our students are really in-person learning 2 days out of the week. And so there is a loss of some learning, there's a loss of exposure to curriculum. This is not the most ideal situation for academic learning. And then, of course, because our students have been isolated and because their worlds have really been turned upside down, there is that whole aspect of mental challenges that are facing not only students but staff and also families as well. If you think about where we were about this time last year, we worked hard to bring to you folks, and with your encouragement and support, we had a balanced budget for fiscal year 2021. That changed significantly when we started giving money back to the state because the state was in dire economic needs. And one thing that has just here happened lately, Moody's, which is the financial institution across the United States that provides ratings to governmental institutions and private institutions, downgraded our bond rating from an AA2 to an AA3. And this has been a little hard for us because we've prided ourselves in a very good, excellent really, school bond rating position. And the reason that we received for the downgrade seems to me should apply to not only all school districts in the state of Nevada, but also all governmental agencies. Because they're saying that one of the concerns was that our school district, like all school districts, all governmental agencies, could be in financial difficulty if all of our staff members retired at once. I mean, really, that's the concern. And so for those of us that have lived in the PERS system and understand how it works, you don't just start working for the state government and then retire. I mean, there's a whole system of time that has to go to being incorporated into the system. And then, people after they've worked for 30 years or purchased years, then they have the ability to go out. But it seems a little odd that would be a consideration for downgrading this this bond rating that we've worked hard to establish and to maintain over time. So that is one other thing that is part of this year for us. So as we started this current school year, of course, the pandemic persisted, and we opened the new school year after we studied it and used a community committee to look at our choices, our opportunities. That group was made up of parents and staff members. And we took what the governor had given us in terms of directions and guidance, especially as it applied to social distancing, use of our buildings, and the use of face masks, and just trying to make sure that we could maintain a safe operational condition for our staff members and for our students. We decided to go with a hybrid model, which had in-person staff and student interactions for 2 days out of the week, and then a remote program for a third day during the week. And then we also provided full remote access using Chromebooks to some of our students and families who elected to go that route. In October of this school year, we brought back, after 9 weeks of experience in running a school district under that condition, to our pre-K students through second grade, returning to school 4 days a week. Then at the start of the second semester, after 2 quarters really, of school under those conditions, we brought back our students in grades 3 through 6 for 4 days a week. And now we are to a point where the governor has made another change in the restrictions that allow us to put up to 75% of our students back into our buildings and 66% into our buses. As I mentioned during my report earlier in this meeting, we're going to really be challenged by this one, because if you're going to try to bring back approximately a total, I should say, of 75% of your students, who do you decide gets to come back during that time and who has to stay home? So we're looking really at the biggest impact being at our secondary schools. So with the 7th and 8th grade students, those students have a discrete schedule that they attend every day. But the difficulty that we have in our system is that we've got cohorts that are at different sizes. And so to bring back all students in all cohorts, and let's just say that we're going to, we would want to bring them back 100%, we would have some classrooms that would be more full than others or less full than others. And so that would challenge the teachers and the administrators at the site to actually operate school. And then at the high school level, because those students are on a block schedule, we would have to do something different, which would likely involve doing a rescheduling of all of the students in order to have them fit into our buildings. And as you know, the classrooms at Carson High School are of varying sizes, and it would take some very specific hand scheduling in order to do that. So this concept around trying to bring back 75% of our students is going to be a challenge. And we're still working on that. We've had several meetings with our principals trying to talk through this situation and how we might be able to accomplish bringing more students back. Because ultimately, the governor has mentioned that on May 1, if new cases of COVID continue to go down, we could actually be given the authority back by the governor to make these changes and calls on our own. That might be a little bit too late. May 1 is, right at the end of the school year, and wouldn't even constitute a quarter or 9 weeks, as I should say, of the school year.
So Rich,
Yep.
when you look at, or I should say Mr. Stokes, when you look at the number of families who are participating in just full digital, how many families is that? Because my presumption is that most of those families are not going to come back, even though the restrictions have been eased a bit.
Trustee Walker, that's a great question, and I have a little slide here that hopefully will address that. So I tried to go through and look at the total enrollment opposed to full remote families who had chosen the full remote model. And as you look at that, each time we've brought students back, the full remote group has reduced slightly. I did just some rough math based on that February 1 date. And across the district, if we looked at those numbers, that is about 14% of our students who are still in full remote. So not quite, it's 85% of our building being occupied. So it would be nice if we could somehow look at that as a way to bring more students back. So we're still trying to look at the different aspects of how we might be able to structure a return to school, but it might also cause us to wait until maybe we do get 100% return.
Well, I think then you also have to look at, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a static number across all schools and all ages.
No, you're
So-
exactly right. And so it doesn't apply just one number to all schools or to the entire school district. Yeah, very general number. One thing that Mr. Fueling asked me to remind you folks was that this year, because of the pandemic, we actually had about 250 fewer enrollments this year than we've had in the past. And part of those numbers showed up as students that were homeschooling, students that families didn't want their kids in school during the pandemic, and certainly students or families who may have gone to private schools where they had made a commitment to go to school all week long without any changes or without any hybrid type models. And so there was a significant change really in our enrollment based on the pandemic. And so how that will play out in next year's enrollment is still to be seen. This is a comparison of staff, and you'll see that we compared June 2020 against our current numbers. And you can see that the significant changes really here have been at the certified staff level. And part of that change in numbers is due to the changes in state grant funds that were given back. For example, if you just talked about Read by Grade 3, we were able to hire coaches and individuals that were working specifically with students, but their salary and benefits were paid by the Read by Grade 3. And so when that money went away, and we were, of course, in that place of ending one school year and starting another, there were some changes in those particular areas. And of course, we also, based on our budget from last year, saw a change in the number of classified staff, particularly in our paraprofessionals. And so those are the representative numbers based on those particular items. I'll draw your attention just to the nurses. We do have coverage of nurses at all of our sites, but instead of having nurses that are our employees, we actually have several now who are independent contractors. So we still have the coverage, but they just aren't necessarily our current employee. They're a contractor instead. And so what happens in making plans for next year? I, for one, am confident that we will be back in school next fall. And if there are any restrictions, I'm hoping that those restrictions are limited to face masks and that we will continue to do some of the sanitizing, some of the social distancing, some of the air exchange, some of the changing of filters, all those things that have been good practices, I think, in general, just to maintain the health and well-being of our students and our staff. I believe that there will be a call for full remote learning. I believe some families will want to see that continue. We are making plans to have remote learning just occur kind of under the umbrella of one site rather than having full remote learning at all of our sites. So this is a work in progress. We think that condition will be based on application, not just by what a family desires. We've seen, of course, that some students have done extremely well in full remote learning. We've seen that some have not done so well. So we want to be able to have the best possibility for success in our in any full remote learning program. And so we expect to be able to bring more information on that process to the trustees in a few weeks. Of course, we'll be more able to utilize all of our operational services because we have placed, and really not just our school district, but all of the state, because there's such emphasis on the need for mobile devices. We are developing and really have developed a good replacement plan for these devices. And I know that this is one of the expectations that has been made at the legislative bodies, and that is you can't ignore the fact that our schools all need to have mobile devices available. So until that magical time comes when you can bring your own device and it will work on all networks, I think that the school district is going to have to be willing and able to budget annually for these replacements for the replacement of these devices. And then, of course, we'll want to maintain, like I mentioned, the safety measures and services. And of course, we'll be working on our strategic plan, including the addition of equity and education language to that document. So that wraps up my presentation. Any questions that you folks have for me? Of course, my staff members are here as well, and they're very capable of adding to our conversation.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have any questions on the board? Laurel.
There it goes. I do have a question. I know that we had the one event for teacher vaccination or employee vaccination, and then the second dose. Have all of our staff that are in the buildings with students that have desired to be vaccinated had the opportunity to do so, or are we still waiting for more of further vaccine allotment?
I believe, while I don't have those exact numbers, that there are still individuals in the schools that desire to have the vaccination. The most recent number I had that identified people that were going to say no to the vaccine was only 38, and that's in almost 1,000 employees. So that's a very low number that had felt, at least at the time, that they would refuse the vaccine. But we still need to have more of our folks vaccinated, but I think the number there is less than more. But I'll find out if I can how many we actually have that's received the vaccine, both doses. I know right now, for example, they're planning a makeup vaccine clinic because some people, for one reason or another, have missed their assigned times.
There we go. There was the delay in shipment of vaccines too, so I'm sure as soon as they get more shipments and get it, there will be another event for the education system as well.
Yes.
Richard?
I was wondering, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Richard. You
Okay.
first.
With the reduction in the Moody bond rating, how does that really affect us? Does that affect us by the amount of interest we pay on a bond or the amount we can bond?
So thank you, Trustee Varner, for that question. Even though we did actually go down, we are still ranked very high with other school districts with regard to our ability to pay back our bonds. Really, that's what a bond rating is whether or not we're a good risk in borrowing money. And so I believe that we're still considered a very good risk. And I believe that if there is any impact on the district, it might be in the amount that our bonds sell for, which would be indicated by the amount of interest. And I would defer to Mr. Fueling if there's anything that he wants to add. Okay.
Mike?
So I was just going to say, we're looking at the end of the year. This has been a really challenging year, and you've been a steady hand. And so I want to say thank you to that. And in a lot of ways, your job's been pretty thankless this year. had a lot of things to deal with, but people in the community recognize you as a good leader of this district. And even as often as this week, just talking to people in the community, not necessarily parents or teachers, just people in the community who say, well, Mr. Stokes does a pretty good job for you guys. And so I think that you should know that even though it's been tough times, people recognize you as a leader and appreciate the work you do. So thank you, Mr. Stokes.
Thank you, Trustee Walker, and I would just like to say that I'm not here by myself. I've got some tremendously talented people throughout the district, and not just at the district office. I mean, we have some real superstars, and that's in all aspects. And I want to say, before I leave this spot, thank you really to our staff members, because they really do want the best for our kids, and they have really worked hard in challenging situations. I want to thank our students. We've all talked about how tough it is, and our teachers, our parapros. Really, it's been a team effort, and grateful for our parents too. This has not been easy on anybody, and there are challenges, and sometimes things don't go as we planned, but we certainly have learned a lot, and we hope that if there have been any mistakes, that we don't repeat those, and that we move forward in a good way.
Yeah, Richard, I'll just maybe, did anybody else have any comments? Okay, go ahead.
I have heard several parents that have thanked our school district and have stated that they really appreciate the way our district went about doing the hybrid, and just given all the circumstances that were there, they were really thought that we did a great job of handling it. So I wanted to relay that message to you from some parents that I talked to.
Thank you.
Yeah, Richard, I just wanted to say, you brought it up before, that we're a nice-sized district. We're big enough to be able to get things done, yet small enough to be personable. And that shows in anybody's ability to reach out and speak to any member of the district. Whereas in some bigger communities, good luck reaching a superintendent or a mayor or a city official. Here we can do that. And so I think that's positive. And our district's ability to find a way to bring students back to the classrooms through hybrid models and able to bringing them back little by little while still maintaining social distancing and whatnot, I think is a credit to you and your staff and all the members of the school district. There's some districts out there that you've seen on the news, their students have not been in the buildings for basically the whole year, and that creates a number of issues. And we've been fortunate to not be in those shoes. So I think, a lot of, while there's always room to improve, I think we're doing a good job. And I think most people realize the challenge this creates. And with that, you mentioned that, but, congratulating and appreciating not only our staff, but our students and their families is important, because it really, especially in this time, it takes a community. And everybody's doing their part. And yes, there's frustrations out there for people and there's hardships, but I think everybody's really working together, trying to do the best we absolutely can. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody out there. I'll just throw a blanket thank you out there, because there's a lot of folks sacrificing, but also working hard in the best interest of our students. So thank you for that. We're going to move on to item 9, which is presentation and discussion on the development of the tentative budget for the Carson City School District for fiscal year 2021 through 2022. And this is, again, a discussion-only item, not for action. And Andrew Fueling, if you will.
Thank you, President Cassioppo. Thank you, trustees. AJ Fueling for the record. I will say right off the bat that this is not the presentation I was hoping to bring you tonight, in that there hasn't been a lot of development in learning what our revenue numbers are going to look like for next year. So we had I'll get into it as I get through the presentation. It's rather short, and there are not a lot of graphs. I apologize, President Cassioppo.
I will persevere.
So, as always, the district has about 20 different funds and varying revenue sources, but the one that we pay the most attention to, and every district pays the most attention to, and has the kind of greatest importance to any district, is the general fund. And currently, we are still in a holding pattern. So, as I mentioned the last time I presented on the budget, we were kind of caught off guard by a change in the expectation for how funds would be distributed, as Senate Bill 543 during the 2019 session named it the pupil-centered funding plan. That is now in a phased-in approach for this biennium and to go into full effect in the next biennium. What we do know, and again, this is still kind of early in the legislative process, but what the governor's recommended budget has built into it is still using this model, but only for distributing state aid, not in any way distributing local revenues. So that is a really significant change and different than the distribution methodology going back as far as we know. So the local revenues, then local school support tax, government services tax, property taxes are effectively outside the pupil-centered funding plan. So that's really the big question mark. In overwhelmingly districts across the state, their primary revenue source is these local revenues. So it's a significant amount of funding. But that we don't know how that is going to be distributed. We had a meeting with all the CFOs of the school districts on Thursday with the Nevada Department of Education. They are very aware that this is a pressing issue for all districts, and they are working on developing a methodology. The clearest impact is to the charter schools in the state. So charter schools, it seems, here in Carson, we have Carson Montessori. Carson Montessori has about 300 kids attending. Yet statewide, there's over 60,000 students attending charter schools. So this is a really big factor. And years ago, when charter schools started and how they kind of got integrated into the funding plan, it really wasn't that big of a factor because there were so few kids, and how they decided to make that happen just really didn't have that large of an impact. But now, with 60,000 students statewide, it makes a much bigger impact. So the level of funding in fiscal year 20, charter schools had total revenues of about $425 million. And again, that's statewide, all charter schools. So charter schools do not collect local revenues. We have to, we give a portion of our local revenues to resident students that attend charter schools, but it is a small portion of what our total local revenue pot is. And so given the changes that the state is trying to make, some method of distribution has to be not only figured out for us, but figured out for how some of those revenues, more of those revenues would go to charter schools likely, to kind of make them whole and make districts whole in the process. So it's a really important factor, and unfortunately we just have a rather opaque picture of what that is going to look like right now. The Department of Education is working on it, but we do not have an expectation for when we would find out that information. This is kind of a rather stressful place to be, considering where we are in the timeline. Traditionally, again, we have a tentative budget that's due. I'll be presenting to you at the first meeting in April, and I would certainly hope that we have better information by the time we get to that meeting. But again, we're not exactly sure at this point.
So something I've been trying to figure out is when this proposed plan is fully implemented, it seems to me that all of that local revenue goes into a big pot and it won't essentially support the local economy. So a lot of our local taxes are going to subsidize bigger school districts, which, are in a whole different area of the state.
Sure, that's a good point. And in the full implementation of the pupil-centered funding plan, that clearly is the outcome of it. All of these revenues the state has been putting into education from their own general fund, the room tax that was passed in 2009, the marijuana taxes, all of those go into that's a part of the state aid pot that they distribute. But then you have these local revenues, and all of those local and state revenues will go into this larger, what they call the state education fund, or now it's the state education account fund, and get redistributed back out. So that certainly is an outcome. You are not guaranteed to keep all of the local revenues generated in your area going towards your schools. And I don't know if in this process, because we really don't know what's going to happen right now with these local revenues in this phased-in process. It'll be interesting to see if whatever the outcome is and whatever the distribution methodology is, if that somehow influences what the final pupil-centered funding plan looks like when we do the full implementation, because maybe they will learn something through this process or come up with some different ideas. But that's clearly an outcome that they pointed out.
And I think that it's, one of the things we know is all school districts need more adequate funding. And I think that it's kind of being pitted, rural versus urban. And really the fact is this plan is not going to be successful unless they truly increase funding for education. Just taking what is already inadequate and pushing a greater share of it towards the urban centers isn't going to solve anything for any of us.
And absolutely true. All I would say is, as much as I've spent a lot of my time on this formula with the commission, and that's kind of been the talk, it is in no way near the importance of the level of adequacy of funding. That is the top priority. If you're going to change anything and really make a difference, that's it. The distribution, really, no matter how you cut it, even if you stay in the old Nevada plan, you still have inadequate funding. So bottom line, that is something that needs to change. A little bit of an update. The Department of Taxation released their preliminary projections for local projected taxes. And I guess of the most interest, the local school support tax is expected to increase almost $1 million, about $750,000. And that's good. In the old Nevada plan, I was always happy to see that increase because that really is a sales tax. So it reflects economic activity, economic growth, and if that's going up, then good things are happening. In the new, but it didn't really, all it did by getting more support tax, the state just gave you less aid. So it was like a perfect wash. And in the new funding plan, when we get there, and I'm not sure how it's going to impact in these 2 years, and then when we get to the pupil-centered funding plan full implementation, really there's not direct benefit because as Trustee Walker pointed out, that will go into this larger education pot at the state level. Government services tax is expected to increase, but it's actually a pretty small increase, and I don't know the methodology that taxation uses. I would say that it looks as though in the current year, government services tax is going to come in right around what is budgeted, maybe just a shade under. So to me, that says that it's pulling back a little bit. That number had been increasing well over 5% for the last 5 years. Some years, I think, increasing 11 or 12%. So that projection is pretty conservative. I wanted to bring up something I did know about, since we don't know about the state aid. So we can talk a little bit about the federal stimulus and relief revenues that are coming in or have come in. The one that you've all heard about, and there's been several presentations, and Mr. Stokes spoke to it a bit, the CARES money, or Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Funds. All of the funds related to that federal relief expire September 2022. So the first large pot that we received that was directly for the school districts, and our portion of that was the ESSER 1 funds, which we received about $1.1 million. Within that, or within the CARES allocation the state received, there was also the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or the GEER funds. And so even though we learned about CARES many months ago, it seems a lifetime ago with COVID, we just were notified here recently the amount that we would receive. So that it was a much smaller pot of money, and we received a proportional allocation of that. So those funds will be coming in soon, and then at this time, kind of the thought process, trying to be strategic with this is, given the uncertainty of next year, that as much as possible, if we do not need to access these funds this year, because we have until September of 2022, that we would try to hold off until next year to support activities. The next round of federal funding, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRRSA, expires September 2023. So that really gets through the entire biennium, the next 2 years of school. And this is a much more significant pot of money. The ESSER 2 funds, we were notified a couple weeks ago that we were going to be receiving about $4.4 million. And again, we technically could spend some of those funds now, but again, the thought process is, given the uncertainty, we're looking to try to hold off on that as much as possible. And again, strategically thinking about, we don't necessarily, even if we could spend it all next year, because it has 2 years of usage, we may really want to think about how we spread those funds out over the next 2 years to help support the district as much as possible. We are expecting another round of GEER funds, GEER 2 as well. But given that we were just notified GEER 1, we have, I think the state is still working through the GEER 2 funds. We've not found out the allocation of those just yet. But again, thinking about using those in the next 2 years. On the expenditure side, so I presented 2 meetings ago kind of generally where we think expenditures are within this new general fund, which comprises the old general fund, the class size reduction fund, and the new Nevada plan fund, which is SB 178, and many other state grants that are all kind of wrapped into one. So we're ready as far as knowing what all of the costs of all of those items making up the fund are expected to be for next year. But again, until we have a revenue number, it's not incredibly useful. It's just that we're kind of prepared. As soon as we have that, we can be ready to go. And one note, and I think I've mentioned this before, but given, we're talking about, Mr. Stokes mentioned that we lost about 250 students this year from the prior year. We would expect next year that many of those would come back. But it's just important to remember that any new students that we add will bring additional costs, yet we will receive no additional funding for them. And playing with some of the models that have been provided to us on the commission, and I hadn't done this before because I was just worried about kind of the hold harmless piece and focused on the dollar amount. But if we added kids next year, if we miraculously added 1,900 students, we would actually break out of the hold harmless and be on the new funding formula. But it's just, I guess, kind of perspective that we could add 1,800 students next year and receive no additional money. And on top of that, with the local revenues coming in, however that they get distributed to us, they are not guaranteed by the state anymore, which historically there was always this guarantee of a per pupil revenue amount. So you could add 1,800 students, not get any additional revenue, and then if the country, the state went into another economic crisis, your local revenues would drop and you would just have to deal with it. The state does not there's no expectation the state would come in. I don't know that the state is in the financial position to come in and support in that case. So just kind of a interesting side note, I guess. Yeah, truly. Are there any questions? I know I'm not excited that there wasn't better information in here, but.
I just like how you ended on that positive note.
Yeah, right, yeah. I try.
Do we have any questions from the board? Richard?
Recently, I read that the PERS contribution is going to go up 0.25%. You probably don't know the figure, but how big an impact is that going to have on our budget?
I had the number. I want to say it's about $200,000. I could get back to you on that exactly, but overall, and that's across all funds. So not just general fund, folks who are funded otherwise by state and federal grants. It's all in, I think, about $200,000, but I can check on that again.
Any additional board questions? No, seeing none, we'll just stay tuned. Thanks, AJ. I appreciate the report.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 10, approval of the consent agenda. This is for possible action.
I'll move that we accept the consent agenda as submitted.
The second.
Okay, we have a motion by trustee Walker, second by trustee Varner. Any board comment or public comment?
No public comment, Mr. Cassiopo.
All righty, then we'll bring it to a vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And just for record, again, we had trustee Carini, who was able finally to listen in, but despite best efforts, he was not able to participate. So, our vote did not include, he was unable to take part in the vote. Okay, item 11, informational items for discussion only. I just wanted to bring up to the board Wednesday, which says on here, February 24th, Community PLC, 6 p.m. via Zoom. And Richard, thanks for letting us know that we had quite some interest in it. So look forward to a good turnout. Item 12, requests for future agenda topics. Any requests? Okay, let's go with Laurel and then we'll go to Stacy.
There we go. Just wondering at what point do we want to revisit the Snyder property and look at that? It might still be a ways down the road, but just something to think of. If we get 1,900 students, we're going to need more square footage.
No, I think that's certainly on the radar. I'll work with Mr. Stokes and kind of keep it on the radar and see when we want to bring that back. Sorry, trustee Varner.
Yes, trustee Wilkie had a question. Can you ask, did the stimulus money pay the additional wages for those employees who had to come into the buildings during the first part of the pandemic? That's via text, so,
So if I'm understanding the additional funds for staff that were classified staff working during that time, no, that wasn't paid for through the stimulus funds. And that's still a work in progress actually at this time, getting that to happen.
Okay, any, under request for future agenda topics, anything else? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the last topic, which is adjournment. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.